We're going to go ahead and get started because we are going to have a very full presentation today. So I'm very excited to introduce our presenter today, Alan Michael Graves. But first, I know we need to take care of some housekeeping details. So today's Stress, Trauma, and Resilience seminar will be filmed and placed on YouTube following the presentation. The videos are unlisted, but the link is available on our NFRC website. All questions will be part of the recording, and a member of our team will come by with a microphone. So if you do have a question, if you could just wait till the microphone gets to you. I know it's hard to remember. If you prefer that your question not be recorded, please just wait until Alan Michael is done, and you can ask him at the conclusion of today's seminar. And please also, if you can remember to complete the evaluation at the end. So I am very pleased to introduce Alan Michael Graves, who is the Director of Project Fatherhood in the Leadership Center at Children's Institute, which is also known as CII. And the Leadership Center at CII is the nucleus for a broad range of multidisciplinary activities, from research and program development to training and advocacy for policy change. Alan Michael has worked in the human services field for the past 10 years with extensive experience as a manager and administrator for both public and private agencies. And he brings these diverse perspectives to his work, helping agencies develop, implement, and evaluate interagency systems of care, family partnerships, and wraparound programs. And for the past 5 years, he has taken on the vision of the late Dr. Herschel Swinger to build one of the foremost fatherhood programs in the country. And he and his team travel nationwide, offering intensive training in the fatherhood curriculum to organizations seeking to implement this innovative program to their constituents, and engaging fathers to utilize effective strategies to significantly and positively impact the lives of their children is a passion of Alan Michael's. And I should also note that Alan Michael is a fellow Bruin, currently enrolled in the doctoral program in the Graduate School of Education in educational leadership. And I actually just found out this morning that his dissertation is going to be focusing on academic success of children involved with the foster care system and fathers' roles in that. So that may be of interest to a lot of people in this room. And I would just mention on a personal note, I had been hearing about Project Fatherhood for several years, been hearing great things about it, but it was really only the last year or two that I was fortunate enough to meet Alan Michael, where he was generous enough to share his wisdom around navigating CII, where we are currently involved in a research partnership, and we really benefited from his wisdom. One of the things that really struck me as he was sharing his experience with Project Fatherhood was his deep commitment to ensuring that Project Fatherhood is responsive to the needs of fathers, the families, and the communities they serve. And I know that sort of community partnered approach is something that we all aspire to in our work as well. So we look forward to benefiting some more from your wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you. So good morning. Hi. Like Blair said, I'm a director at the Children's Institute. And the Children's Institute, for the last 110 years, has been servicing families affected by trauma. But really, like a lot of organizations and systems, they're really servicing mothers and their kids. For a long time, fathers were left out of the equation. And in the last 20 years, again, headed and founded by Dr. Swinger, Project Fatherhood sought to specifically include father when we say family. And so when we say family, we mean family, and we mean the whole family. So it doesn't highlight men, it just makes sure that the fathers are part of the equation when we talk about how we service and make the family whole. I usually start with a couple of things about me. One I'll say is I'm the grandson of a Baptist preacher, so once I get going and start feeling it, you'll see me sweat. I don't have high blood pressure, I'm not gonna pass out, it just means that I'm really feeling it. The other is that we're, in our program and in my philosophy, I was raised by a single mother. She did a fantastic job. But make no mistake that if my father was around, things would have been different. And I don't mean better, I just mean different, as I would have had different tools in my tool belt to navigate some of the things that I've done, from the military to law school to dating to having children to being, a father. And so we are very positive about women, and we're very positive about systems. We just teach guys how to navigate them. So we don't want the fathers to come talk about what a horrible person his ex-wife was, or his social workers being a bad word, or anything like that. We're just going to teach you how to navigate that, because the goal is reunification with your children. Most of our clients come from the child welfare system, and they've either lost or reduced their involvement with their kids. And so our goal is to create a plan from the very beginning for you to reunify with your kids. I have 3 kids myself. One's 25, Christopher. Kevin's 21. And don't judge me, I have a 3-year-old, Matthew. And I've adopted Matthew when he was 2 days old. And so I'm doing this fatherhood thing again. So not only am I leading the team, I'm going through it myself and finding that it's different than it was 20 years ago, raising a little boy. But I'm enjoying it tremendously. So father engagement. We believe that father absence is considered, like many, one of the major social problems in our society. I say it quite frequently that I think a lot of us do a lot of good work, but if we don't look at bringing men back into the equation, specifically in our communities, not necessarily our families, although that's great, a lot of fathers are not coming back. They're in prison, they're in jail, they're dead, so they're not coming back. We need to bring men back into the community. And I tell people all the time, I remember when I was younger, I remember men who I didn't even really know popping me upside the back of my head and telling me, I'm gonna go tell your mom or your grandma, right? If you're doing those type of things. We can't do that today because we might get shot. But bringing men back into the equation is extremely important. I facilitate a couple of groups at local elementary schools, and the principal frequently says, the moment men came onto the campus, the environment changed. And just because children specifically see men as an authority figure. And so they do less bad things when men are present. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I'm not going to go through statistics. I'm going to forward these to you guys along with the sources. But a couple I'd like to point out that children who don't have their father figures in their lives are 5 times more likely to be poor. The ones that really stick out to me are 2 times more likely to experience behavioral problems at school. How I recruit most of my guys is that the second to the bottom, 4 times more likely to engage in early sexual behavior. So when I tell the guys that, they're like, where do I sign up to keep my daughter from having sex, right? But these are figures that we guide our work through. So Project Fatherhood, I'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'll go into some of the how and whys, what we do. So a lot of organizations try to work with men the same way they work with women. They'll have a mommy and me program. They'll change it to daddy and me and operate it the same way. What we know is that men and women are different, obviously, right? And that we need to approach working with them differently. And how we do that, first of all, is through trust and rapport. So most of us have probably been in an environment where we had to do intakes, right? So our intake lasts about 3 hours, 3.5 hours long. And for most organizations, they're like, no, we need billable hours. You can't spend that much time on an intake. But the payoff for that is we have a 96% rate of individuals joining the program and showing up the first day after they've done their intake. Because I've created a rapport with that individual, unlike most programs where I have a checklist and I go through and I have to answer all these questions. With my staff, I encourage them, you don't walk in with any notes for the first hour. The first hour, I just want you to sit and talk. I'm sorry, I have how many? Oh, only one male. What's your name, sir? PK. Can I call you PK? Yeah. Okay. So PK and I are going to be friends because we're going to bond. I lost my train of thought. Intake, yes. So if PK came in, I might sit and talk with PK for the first hour, and he'll say, "Oh, I went to UC. Oh, so did I." Or I like cars, and so we'll bond over the first hour. I'll let PK go get some water, and I'll try to hurry up and write down everything we talked about in the last hour. And then we'll come back and I'll let him know, obviously you're here for a reason. I need to get some information. But again, by that point, he's already bought into, this guy is here for more than just a number in his program. Along those lines, we've gotten to the point where guys stay in our program a lot longer than they're required. So most times it's 12 to 16 weeks that someone would recommend because we fulfill the requirement of a parenting class. But we've got guys that have been in the program for 10 years. Traditionally, men don't get together and have chats. How many of you guys have been in part of a girls' night out or a book club? Oh, come on. There we go. So typically, females get together and they talk about life. They talk about their children, their husbands, their work. When men get together, we typically get together and lie or one-up each other, right? And so we've created a space where we don't have to do that. So the guys come once a week and they talk about the crap in their lives that prevent them from parenting in a meaningful way. We've identified that there's 5 reasons here why men are not involved. I've been in the program 10 years and I've never heard a guy say, I just don't want to be involved with my child. I've never heard a guy say that. Usually there are reasons. Some of them are self-explanatory. I'm just going to highlight a couple. There's poor self-esteem, the intergenerational component. I forgot to tell you one thing at the beginning. Sometimes it slips, but I use a curse word in context to the presentation. So this is the first one that'll slip. The intergenerational, the guys will come into the room and they'll say, you know, my granddaddy wasn't SHIT, my dad wasn't, and odds are I'm not going to be. That's where they start from, right? The next one is social and psychological isolation. One of the examples that I use, and it was personal, is about a year ago, my son went to have physical. And at the end of the physical, the doctor said, he has an ear infection, and I'm going to prescribe some medication. Can I have your wife's number to call her and tell her how to administer the medication? So I said, oh, no, that's okay. You know, you can tell me I can do it. He was like, no, really. Middle-aged guy. No, I can do it. He said, no, give me her number. I'll call her. I said, no, dude, I have multiple degrees. I can put 2 drops here and 2 drops here. And he was very, very adamant that I give him my wife's number. Well, first of all, I'm not married. And secondly, I was a little ticked off that, you know, you're not allowing me to do this. But halfway through this, me getting angry with him, I got it, that he wasn't being a jerk. He wasn't trying to insult me. In his mind, that was not my role. That was mom's role. And that happens to fathers, and they're isolated in several different areas. Medical is one. Schools, we found it's huge. I was very involved in my kid's life, but I was the only male on school site council and the PTA for almost 6 years. A lot of it had to do with fathers who were working, and a lot of the things that the activities that they planned were during working hours. But the other is that they didn't make it comfortable for men to participate. And so we're isolated in that way. And then the last is that I'll go over is the access. We are not provided access in the way that mothers are. So I use the example of schools, and this is no exaggeration. I would go onto the campus of along with other parents, we'd all walk up and I would be the only one in the group to get stopped. Why are you here? What are you doing on campus? And I would say, I'm coming to audit a class, or I'm going to wherever I was going. And it was really a challenge to navigate the school nurse, the security guard, the lady at the front desk, and then ultimately the teacher. So that's an example of access, of reasons why they're not involved and engaged. So today, our area of focus about how men and fathers create a change in the game are going to be centered around masculinity and sexuality, trauma, and then bias, right? So the 3 most destructive words that every man received when he's a boy is to be told, be a man. So there's a couple of others. Can anybody tell me some of the other ones? Be a man. Okay, that's a good one. That's the first I've ever heard. Boys don't cry, man up. That's a good one. We're going to get to that. Remind me of that, because that's really important. When I was younger, my mother used to say, don't stand like a girl, because I used to stand on one leg, one hip. Don't stand like a girl, or boys don't do that. Don't run like a girl. Those are things that are told to us when we're little, but they affect us our entire lives. To this day, I catch myself standing on one foot, and I have to correct myself thinking my mom's going to come behind me and pop me in the back of the head or something. So we have to watch what we say from the very beginning. And a lot of what we've learned over the years is that masculinity and sexuality, although it's its own topic, it has a lot to do with how we parent. We put a lot of this on ourselves and then pass it on to our children. So about a year and a half ago, this movie was Creed. Creed was very popular. That's the Rocky movie, right? This guy on the left was the star of the movie. And this went across the internet and Facebook. Anybody see it, aware of it? Okay. So it was very negative, specifically with African American women. They could not stand that he had his hand on his head. To me, this was the director or the producer of the movie on the right. And to me, it was like, yeah, we did it, we made it, but they made it very sexual, that they were not supposed to be hugging and touching. It was amazing. At the same time, there was a Sports Illustrated cover that was going on. There was like 7 women. They were all almost nude, but they were literally laying on each other and holding each other, and everybody thought it was beautiful, whereas this was nasty. Another picture. This guy was in Washington, D.C. The older one was cold. He had slipped and fell. The other guy was a stranger who was comforting him and trying to warm him. People thought it was nasty. Strangers shouldn't touch like that. And then lastly, this is my favorite. This is generations of kissing. As an African-American male myself, you don't kiss your dad past 2, right? 2 or 3. And so I've changed that now. Even my 20-year-old, I kiss them now when they leave. But it was people feel a negative way about this. So these are called the man rules, and this is how we run our program. These are all things that society tells men that they have how they have to act. We always have to be in control. We shouldn't cry, shouldn't ask for help, don't show emotion, be sexual supermen, don't show weaknesses, have integrity, and be responsible. And also be a provider. Let me go back one here. So what we know, though, is when fathers go into programs or therapy or counseling, the opposite takes effect. So when I go into counseling, the first thing they tell me is, you don't have to be in control. So society is telling me I have to be in control. In counseling, they're telling me I can't be in control or shouldn't be so controlling. So guys are stuck. Where do I go? I'm stuck in the middle. Same thing, don't cry. Oh, let your emotions go. The moment you let yourself go, you're a sissy, or you're weak, or we can go all the way down the line where society tells us what the ideal man is, and on the other side, when we receive counseling or some type of program, it's different. These are some of I use also the box, because in the box are the things that society tells me I should be: strong, tough, hard. And on the outside, when I'm not those, these are the nasty words that men are labeled. And those words on the outside cause us to do things that are not healthy for not only ourselves, our relationships, or our children. So I wanted to spend a little time on, because this is new for us. For the first, I run a federal grant for the last 12 years. And for the first 10 years of that grant, I was not allowed to use the word trauma or use the word therapy, right? The feds, you can't use federal dollars to provide therapy, and they would not allow us to say trauma, right, in any of our reporting. So 2 years ago, after fighting for multiple years, we're now allowed to at least address that trauma is part of the work that we do. And I would say it's a significant part of the work that we do. Because, especially as it pertains to fatherhood, because everyone wants us to be perfect fathers. They want us to get jobs. They want us to be financially stable. But one of the things that they don't do is address the trauma of our lives. And so the guys that I work with, they've had some significant trauma in their lives that has been unaddressed. So a big part of the grant currently is employment. So everybody wants the guys to get jobs. I would argue that I would much rather you would deal with the effects of your lives that brought you to where you are now before trying to get you the best job in the world. So the examples I use, I have a great relationship with Chase Bank right now, and so we put the guys through a program to ultimately be employed through Chase. But it's very difficult to just put a guy into a job when you haven't addressed that his mother was a prostitute, his dad's been in prison all of his life, he used to sell drugs to feed his brother and sister, and you just want him to go to work. So what happens is we get these guys the jobs, and they're not successful because they're still trying to deal with some of the things that they went through when they were children or younger in their lives. So trauma is an important part of the work that we do. So these guys meet once a week. It's almost like it's an AA model. And the work is centered around 10 core topics, which we'll talk about in a minute. So actually, I'm going to go back and talk about those 10 core topics now. So unlike most programs where you have a curriculum, and in week 1 you talk about this, and in week 2 you talk about that, and you work your way through the curriculum, in our groups, we talk about what's going on in your life. So if this was our group for tonight, it's Wednesday, right? Wednesday night, we're meeting, and I might, as the facilitator, say we're going to talk about substance abuse tonight. But we also do a check-in every group. And as we're checking in, PK says, unfortunately, I had a death in the family, or something tragic has happened. In most programs, oh, we're really sorry to hear that. And then they go on and talk about substance abuse. Or in our program, we can't not talk about separation and loss today, because he needs to leave here different than he came. And this is different than, I would say, 99% of the programs that operate through a curriculum. So we might talk about separation and loss for 15 minutes, and if everybody in the room's okay, we'll move on to another topic, or the topic that I originally talked about. Or we could talk about it the whole session today and a whole session next week, and sometimes it goes on for 3 or 4 weeks, sometimes even a month on the same session. So you're working with exactly what's affecting the guys in the room, as opposed to just getting them through a class. Issues that we have with some parenting classes is that you could sit in the back of the room for 12 weeks, our parenting classes. DCF has taken custody of your kids because for one reason or another, but you can go to this class, as long as you sit back there and don't cause trouble, you get a certificate at the end that says you're done. In our program, it's a little different because you don't graduate from being a father, so you're not going to graduate from the program, right? And I want you to work on specifically what you were sent here for to get your kids back, because ultimately in the program, this isn't about dads, it's about kids. And I don't want to be responsible for giving you your kid back and you haven't addressed any of the things that you came to the program for. It's one of the things that we constantly remind ourselves and our staff with. This is not about the guys. You'll hear me say father involvement, father engagement, but it's really about the kids, and we use fathers as a medium to help make sure that the outcomes for kids are increased. I'm going to stop for a minute and see if there's any questions, because I don't want to wait until the end. Everybody cool? So one of the other things we like to talk about is bias, and specifically bias towards men. I tell this story, and it's true. I recently went to I go to the gym at about 4:30 in the morning, and on the way home from the gym, I said I needed to get some cash because I was taking a colleague to lunch. And I pulled up to an ATM in Baldwin Hills, and why at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning these people were out, I don't know. But there was an ATM on each side of the front door. And as I pulled up, I saw a group of guys on the left side and a group of guys on the right side. And my mind started to go again, why are they here this early? It happened to be that the guys on the left were Caucasian and the guys on the right were African American and Latino. And without thinking in an instant, I said, I'm going to go to this side because if something happens, I can take these guys, right? Total bias. On the right-hand side, I said, I might have a little trouble with the brothers, right? So I'm not going to go over there. The reality is that these the Caucasian guys could have been Kung Fu masters and had gotten me, and these were choir boys on their way to rehearsal, right? But my bias said something different. My bias said that these guys can't fight, or the opposite, that these were troublemakers, right? And so we talk about acknowledging our bias, especially as we do work with systems, child welfare, the school systems. We really have to acknowledge our bias because most of us pretend like they don't exist. What do you guys see? First thoughts, immediate thoughts. I'm sorry? Very good. Others? Religious? In most circles that are non-academic and non-professional, the first thing they say is a terrorist. And it's not bad. I mean, it's bad, but it's real. And that's the bias that some people would have for this gentleman. He's at a wedding, nice guy, no problems. First thoughts. You guys are all Sadidian. Come on now. First thoughts. That's what you got? Okay. No, not me. He looks a little crazy. That was my bias. Something, his eyes, something was wrong. All right. What about here? Homeless. That's usually what I get. Poet? The guy's a millionaire. He's got a lot of money. He's an excellent father, takes care of his kids. The complete opposite of what most people think. And then the last one here, one of my fathers. Gang member. Is that what you said? Okay. Anybody else? Violent. This is in Echo Park, at just right down the street from our campus at Otis Booth. Guys were out playing basketball. He's an instructor at Homeboy Industries. Great guy, no convictions, no problems, nothing. But our bias, based on his tattoos and the way he looks, and it looks like it's a prison photo, really. Our bias immediately kicks in, and that's what we try to get people to acknowledge. That. So let me rewind a little bit. I'm trying to squeeze too much into this presentation. One of the things that I also talk about is my bias. I have a bias against DV, and it's very challenging because both of my parents were very young when they had me. They were 15, and they tried to make it work for the first 3 years. But after the first 3 years, the last thing I remember about my father was him beating the crap out of my mom. To the point where I remember like it was yesterday. There was blood on her forehead, and she finally said, "Let's go," and we moved to Las Vegas. Long story short, that's my bias. 90% of the guys that come through the door, guess what they have? So I have to check myself every single day. They're like, here's a stack of clients. I read through everyone before they come in, and I personally go out and introduce myself and tell them about the program. But in my mind, I'm thinking because I see the pictures of how he hurt his wife or a significant other, and I have to check my bias because I know that I potentially could treat him wrong based on what has happened in my life. And so that's the bias that we work with people, not to put them on blast or to make them feel bad, but just to acknowledge that there is a bias, especially with working with men and men of color. So in this program, again, we work with them around trauma. PK and I could have been friends for all of our lives. We grew up together since we were like 3 or 4. Really good friends, see each other a couple times during the week, but there are some things we are not going to talk about. We're not going to talk about anything that's warm and fuzzy. We're not going to talk about anything that makes us show our emotions. We'll continue to say everything is okay. So in these groups, which we call groups, they're men in relationship groups, we really create a space where men can talk about, again, the things in their lives that affect them in a way that they either parent wrong or they have not so healthy relationships. And in those groups, the guys come once a week, and the 10 core topics, they range from substance abuse, choosing a healthy mate, domestic violence, separation and loss, the difference between anger and pain, the difference between punishment and discipline, which is one that I even recently learned. My older children, I was a believer in spanking. And it wasn't until working in this group that someone who wasn't a facilitator gave me avenues of disciplining different. So what we teach is, for example, if there was an outlet here and my son was playing with the outlet, I can go over and tap his hand and say, "Don't do that." But if I didn't tell him why, then it was just punishment. If I tapped his hand and said, "Don't do that because it's an outlet, there's electricity," there was a teaching moment behind it, it was discipline. We're not taught that. Most of us are expected to be super dads when, one, we didn't have a dad in our lives ourselves. We've never had a positive male role model. My positive male role models were my uncles who were players. They had 7 girlfriends and whatever. But I looked up to them. And so it wasn't until I went into the military and started meeting different people from different backgrounds to see that that wasn't the norm, right? And so we work with these guys to show them that there can be and there is a different way to being a parent, specifically a dad. But we know that just those merged groups are not enough, so we also work with them individual and family counseling, job training, financial literacy. A majority of the guys that we work with have not ever had a checking account. And again, some people say, "Oh, you focus on the negative for these guys." Well, they're here for a reason because of those negative things. But one of the things that we know that's positive and we start off with every day is that they love the heck out of their kids. And the biggest part, the brightest part of my job is in those weekly meetings, maybe every other week, some guy will come in and say, got an announcement, I got custody of my kids, or I got increased visitation. So it counters all the negative things that we talk about here. Our healthy relationship, it says marriage, that's a federal term. Most of the guys that we work with have not been, they're not married, but they've been in their relationship for 20 years. That's his old lady, and we want to honor it. So we've changed that to say relationships instead of marriage. But again, they met, similar to my parents. They met, they had sex, and then they were a family. There was nothing behind it. They didn't know each other. They didn't know how to date. So we go back to the beginning. If this was our office here, I would tell the staff to wear some black pants and a white shirt. We're going to be waiters tonight. We'll put these tables together and invite our clients and their significant others and make them have a date night. We'll put the kids in a child care room and create a space where they now can actually date because they've never done it. They've been together 12 years. And because they're just getting through life and paying bills, they've never actually went out to dinner together. And so we put them in a space where that can happen. You can't talk about your kids or work for the whole hour that we're going to be out to dinner. And you'd be surprised that they find out that they like their significant other because they know something about it other than how we're going to pay the rent type of thing. Parent and child enrichment activities. These are monthly activities. I remember being younger at family events. All the adults were over here playing dominoes and drinking Hennessy, having a wonderful time at family reunions. I just left one last week. It was fun. But on the other side, the kids would be playing, but they would never interact with each other. So once a month, we have an activity where fathers have to engage with their children. They do activities, potato sack race, water balloon toss, whatever, barbecues, beach, but it's an activity, again, for the first time they really realize, I kind of like my kids because I've spent time with them outside of the normal discipline. Not. Legal workshops, housing, and employment. So I talked a little bit about each one, three of these, but our program goals ultimately are to provide responsible parenting. So giving them those tools that I talked about that I wish I had from my father, giving the guys the tools to deal with life on a day-to-day basis, the healthy marriage or relationship workshops, and then the economic stability. Children of participating fathers in our program demonstrate improved functioning both at home and school. So, I mean, I'm sure you guys have all heard the benefits of father involvement. It's true, there are some benefits, but most organizations and most programs don't get to how those benefits are demonstrated and show the results. So we talked about our publications around increased father involvement and what are the actual benefits. There's very little research around the outcomes. So we've done great work. We've done this for 10 years. We have 27 different groups throughout Los Angeles where the guys come meet in English, Spanish, and Korean. We do great work. I'm not tooting my own horn, but we do a really good job. But it's not enough for those merged groups. And so we know we need to step it up. And first of all, it's about changing attitudes of staff. So remember that doctor that I told you about? I've been given permission to talk about. He was a doctor at Cedars. So now every 4 months, I go back and I train all of his new staff on father engagement. So that will never happen to another father. Again, he wasn't being a jerk. He wasn't, first of all, he wasn't made aware that I felt bad. And so not only him, but his new staff all take this training every 4 months. So changing the attitudes of staff. I used to escort fathers to see their social workers. And from the moment we walked through the door, there'd be usually a female, and I'll get to the males in a minute, but usually a female. She'd be standing there like, you look just like my ex. And so this guy was screwed from the time he walked through the door, hadn't done anything. And her bias ultimately affected his custody of his kids. And so she might put him in extra classes. So if he raised his voice, you got an anger management class. I don't need anger management. I'm mad you've taken my kids, and you're giving me attitude. So we really work with changing the attitudes of staff. We've even started giving scholarships to social work students at USC to come into work with fatherhood. So they start, before they get their first case, they're working with men on father engagement. Inclusiveness of language and environment. A lot of this has to do with child welfare, which is a passion of mine. I actually started at CII for a 2-week assignment 12 years ago to help them with some policy work. Um, and I went to a meeting where they were talking about the number of kids in care, specifically African American kids, and it just blew my mind. And I said, this is my new career. Literally, I had went to law school and I was homeschooling my kids at the time and thinking I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. And 2 weeks of being at Children's Institute changed my life. And so I really work with child welfare and improving the outcomes for kids. But what I noticed that in these systems, that everything said mom. The entire case in child welfare is in the mom's name. Dad's name is not listed anywhere except for the child support payments, right? So we were very successful in having them change that. So now every form within the Department of Children and Family Services says mother and father. We're now actually trying to get it changed to parent one and parent two for for same-sex couples, and a lot of our families, the uncle is raising their kids or the grandmother, and they don't feel comfortable writing where it says mom. And so now it's going to say parent one and parent two. Scheduling activities is kind of goes along what I was saying about the school system. My sons went to Dorsey High School, and so we were successful in having them change those parent meetings and school site council to Saturday mornings now, so more parents get to attend as opposed to 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, which is what most of them, even today, if you go to most schools, their school site council or their parent meetings are in the afternoon, where typically the only people that can come are those who are not working, and the administrators love it because most of them don't speak English, and they can sign the sheet so the principal can say, oh, I had 22 people at my parent meeting, but nobody challenged me. Nobody said, no, don't spend $20,000 on a copier. How about a school nurse? Or how about a mental health professional on campus? And so we're getting them to change those hours. Media and communication. Anybody seen the commercial? It's a PSA from the feds where there's 2 little girls in front of a brownstone and they're double dutching. And the father comes home, he's got a little briefcase and he starts to double dutch with him. It's a cute commercial, but most of my work is done in Watts and the brothers are not out there double dutching. So we want media and communication that reflect them in the work that they're actually doing. I skipped something and I'm gonna go back because I was talking about that social worker that I was talking, looks just like, men are the worst because we judge other men based on what we've done in our lives. So PK and I, PK, I'm gonna have to give you a little an honorarium at the end, okay? We judge the men in these programs or come through these systems based on what we've done. We went to school and we got degrees and we're taking care of our kids. Why can't he? And we really are hard on men, especially educated men are the worst on other guys, sometimes even more so than the women. And then the presence of male staff and volunteers. It's just like this room. This room reflects 90% of the places that I go. And talk about father involvement, from schools to hospitals to you name it. This is what it reflects. So we have to make a concentrated effort to increase male staff, even if they're volunteers. Questions so far? I think we got 5 minutes. Yes, ma'am.
I know when we've talked in the past that you had mentioned that most of the facilitators or the leaders of your groups are males. And one of the things we're really thinking a lot about is workforce development. And so I'm wondering where and you're right, I mean, I am noticing that it's predominantly women that are in mental health and social services. Where do you recruit your group leaders from? How do you engage them so that you do have those staff and volunteers?
That's a great question. And so it's kind of multifaceted. The model that we believe in is that men learn from men. And we learn from men in a way that there's less distractions. Usually everywhere I go, there's somebody in the back of the room that has lots of letters behind her name that say, I can facilitate a males group just like any other guy. And she probably could. But what we know is that men act different in the presence of women. So although she's a great facilitator, psychologist, counselor, the men in the room act different. So if I was in this room and there was a young lady who opened the door right now and she had a whole bunch of stuff and I would break my neck to try to get back there to help her. Not that I want to sleep with her, it's just how I was raised, you know? You immediately stop and you go, if it was a guy, I'd be less concerned, but he better get in when he fit in. I'm doing a presentation, right? And so we the same philosophy in our groups. We've had it. There's one facilitator in the history of Project Fatherhood that's been a female. It's Dr. Georgia Leak. You know her? She's from UCLA. And it's because she was brought up in that neighborhood. She knows those guys and she's very successful at it. We've tried it in other areas and it hasn't been successful. So, but it's the other thing is that we work in a social service environment where you have to have a pretty squeaky clean background to work in our organization. And so getting the individuals with lived experience to participate is challenging. At the same time, just because you're male doesn't mean that you get it. I'll give you an example. We have an LGBT, or not LGBT, it's a gay fathers group. And these guys are either surrogates or they've adopted, and they get together once a week to talk about the challenges around their parenting. And the facilitator was there, left, and so I had to hire a new facilitator. And in my mind, he was a great clinician. He was a good guy. So I sent him, I thought I was good. And the guys called back the next week, and they're like, who in the hell did you send over here? That guy, he was crazy. Not only did he not know anything about gay people, he didn't understand about our parenting. And so that was a long way of saying it's challenging because not only do we have to have males, we have to have individuals with lived experience, and at the same time have a clinical or mental health background. And so it's very challenging. I will say that the individuals that are with us have been with us for a long time. I think 8 years is the longest, the shortest amount of time anybody on the team has been there. So when we get them, they enjoy the work and they stay. But it's challenging to get other individuals, which is why, again, we started in school. And so by the time they graduate, I'm ready to get my job. I'm not sure that answers your question, other than actively, constantly recruiting individuals to work. The other thing is that I told you we do individual and group counseling. We use that for the females because it is great to have a female perspective because it can't just be what we think. They have to understand and know the other side. And so when we do our marriage counseling and when we do our individual and group therapy, our interns, our female interns are the ones who facilitate that. But to keep that space, that weekly space safe and or a space where we're not starting to compete with each other, it's male-led. It's been pretty successful. The other thing is that it's amazing how confidential that space stays. In the 12 years, we've had twice where anything that was repeated in that group has been repeated outside the group. And when we go to the group, it says, somebody broke confidentiality. What do you guys want to do? And the guys will say, you got to go. And we have to ask them to leave. But because they know that, it's a pretty safe space, and guys really come in there and talk about the things that are beneficial to them. Is there a question in the back? No? All right. So, like I said, in order to really make some significant changes, some people need some training. So I went back and trained the doctors and nurses. We do it with for professional development with LAUSD teachers. So for a long time, I've been saying we need professional development, and they like to use the word parent involvement along with parent involvement dollars, but it usually doesn't include anything around dads. And so now we've made sure that their professional development amongst the teachers include engaging specifically dads. Judges and lawyers have the worst bias. So I do a lot of training around bias for judges and lawyers, child support, social workers, therapists. So what's new? One of the things that we do is a 5-day training. And so we get individuals from all walks of life, male and female, and we have a 5-day training that models our model. And so they come in, it's emotional, it's intensive, because most of us have some issues around our parents. Even the best of us have issues with our parents. And so you'll see people with our CEOs of organization, and they come in and, no, everything in my life's fine. And by day 2, they're starting to talk about, because we built this trust and rapport. Again, the foundation of our program is trust and rapport. So we built this in 2 days. And, excuse me, they are then able to acknowledge that maybe me and my dad didn't have the best relationship, or I wish it was stronger because all he did was work and I never saw him, and then how that affects their parenting themselves or how they see their husbands in raising their kids. So it gets them to acknowledge. One of the things that we know is that specifically to make fatherhood programs work, you have to start from the top. There has to be a buy-in from the top. And especially as it pertains to trauma. Again, going back to where I talk about today, that's our main focus, is addressing trauma. And even those of us who are in the field, we talk about resilience, we talk about making sure families are whole, but we're very touchy around the negative things. Like, very few of you raised your hand, and I think, just think, if we were in a different setting and you were just amongst your peers, personal peers, when those photos came up, there would have been a different initial thought. I know that it is for me, but I'm very careful when I'm in certain places not to raise my hand and say. And so we really try to break that down and make sure that people are comfortable, still being respectful, but acknowledging some of those things through our 5-day training. Father engagement training, so I do assessments in organizations, specifically businesses, to see if they're father friendly, from the colors on the walls to the magazines that you have on your front desk. You know, everybody thinks if you put an auto maintenance magazine on your desk that you've covered the men. Well, I don't work on cars, you know. And so people realize that, you know, we're not as father friendly as we think we are. Most social service organizations, they have beautiful pictures of kids and their mothers on the walls, but they don't reflect father and daughter, father and son relationships also. So we do an assessment with that and make recommendations to make it more father friendly. Parenting beyond conflict is huge for us because we realize that some couples are not going to get back together, divorce. And so we work with both male and female, to make sure that they're parenting beyond the conflict that they've had. So little Timmy needs to believe that you and I are the best of friends and that we get along really well. When we leave him, we can hate each other again, but as long as he's present, he needs to think that we're the best of friends. Head Start and school involvement. Head Start and fatherhood has been tried for years. I've done the last 3 years was all research on Head Start. And there have been multiple people try to integrate fatherhood work into Head Start, and nobody's been successful, even including myself. But I think we need to look at it a different way, because most people go in and they say, oh, we're just going to engage with fathers. We're going to have a Father Day. But they didn't build in the trust and report part that we found out that's been successful. So now what we're doing is we're not going in asking them to come to a class or participate in anything, just thanking you. Thank you for being part of your son's life. Here's a t-shirt. That's it for the first 6 months. And then later on down the road, once they bought into how important it is being a father figure in their child's life, we're now have our first very thriving merge group in Head Start at our Figueroa site. And it's like 20, it's one of our largest groups now. It's like 27 guys every week. And they're not mandated. They just want to be involved in the academic success of their kids, which reinforces what we said before. Guys have to figure out, they have to know what the benefit is. If I'm going to take another night out of my week to participate in something, what's the benefit? And before, they didn't get that just how it benefited their kid. And so now they do. Foster care, Blair was showing, this is, again, one of my passions. It just makes me I feel emotional talking about foster kids. But foster fathers typically don't have a role in parenting. The female is usually the driving force behind us being foster parents. We're foster parents, but you do everything. I'm just there for whatever reason. So we've created a group where foster dads get together and talk about their role and how important it is that they also participate in that family structure. And then military and veterans, we have a lot of guys who are deployed, and then they come back, and for a year, mom's been doing everything. She's the disciplinarian, she's been paying the bills and cutting the grass, and he thinks he comes home and just gets to be dad again. And it doesn't work like that. You got to work your way back into the family. And so these guys come in and they talk about how demasculating it was for your wife to have cut the lawn, and now there's friction between the two of you because you're telling her, no, I'm doing everything now. And she's like, well, you know, this is how we've been working for the last year. And so that's a pretty interesting group. It's ran at the VA Center, and that's the one that I participate with weekly, and it's amazing. Right here at West LA, yeah. I have 5 minutes for questions. Trauma, merge groups. Yes, sir.
Hi, thank you so much for your compelling talk. So my name's PK Farnsworth. I'm an addiction psychiatrist here. I'm an addiction psychiatry fellow. I'm going to be working at MLK Community Hospital, both in the hospital and in outpatient, creating an addiction program for them. You know, it's kind of a nimble space. You know, we're interested in multiple kinds of programs and ways that we can help that significant LA community. Um, you mentioned how things play out with like hospitals and training. Can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like in the time frame?
Sure. So let me go back just a little bit. Um, there's three ways we would say an individual could not or should not participate in our program. There used to be four, but the three ways were if there's been a substantiated sexual allegation against children. It's almost like jail. Guys just don't want you in the group, and so we refer you elsewhere. If you have a mental health illness that you're not under medication for, because again, these are safe spaces, and these guys really, I mean, they miss Monday Night Football, they're there every week, and so we try not to have disruptions in the group, and so if you're not medically compliant, we ask that you go get medically compliant and come back. Um, if you have an active DV case, like you're currently putting your hands on somebody, it's not the group for you, get help and then come back. And then it used to be substance abuse. But what we found out that there was a significant amount of fathers who were good fathers and they were really good to their kids and their kids needed them, but they are having substance abuse issues. So we created groups. We partnered with Lakata. Are you familiar with Lakata?
I've heard of it.
Yeah. So we partnered with Lakata and trained their substance abuse facilitators to become fatherhood facilitators at the same time. So we have 3 groups now that are meeting around fatherhood. They're active users or trying to get clean, but we haven't eliminated them from like other systems do. Because you have a problem, you don't get to see your kids or be part of your kids' lives. So in the hospitals, to go into your questions, one of the things that we do is not make it a negative about like for that doctor. I had to go back and tell him, I'm not mad at you. I get why it was, but explain some of the things that I talked about in here, how men feel coming into those areas. I'm not sure what you meant about the training part. Can you?
Oh yeah, so like when is one initiative of Project Fatherhood, like does that also include like going to hospitals, going to like programs in the community and trying to build up Project Fatherhood there also?
Yes. So in addition to the training, our goal is to have merge groups in every venue or area where that might be. And so to have one at a hospital would be great for us. We actually have one for young fathers at Children's Hospital. Children's Hospital, close to our office. And so there are guys who have children that are either extremely sick and they're dealing with the trauma around their sick children, and sometimes they act out based on their children being sick. I'll give an example. So if my son had cancer, I'm angry that my son has cancer. And so I'm drinking and I'm going out and sexing. And so these guys meet together to talk about it. It's okay for me to cry about my sick kid. But I have a venue to do that, and so I don't have to do those other things. So the goal is to have specialized groups wherever we can, the LGBT, the schools, because all those kids in all those areas need their fathers too. Yes, ma'am.
So I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you for sharing what you're doing, and I think it's great work. And the question that I have is, it seems as though the roles that are focused on for fathers seem to be pretty traditional roles. And I'm just wondering, for younger men, is there room for men who may want those kind of less traditional roles, and how that's handled?
Absolutely, and we used to have young fathers groups and older groups, but again, I listen to the guys all the time, and it's one of the things that I thrive about our programs. We don't make it about we're the experts. The guys in the rooms are the experts. We're just helping facilitate conversations, and they'll say, I don't want to sit in the room with a bunch of other knuckleheads. I want to sit in the room with the OGs, the guys who have life experience, and talk about. And so the flip side of that is that the younger guys bring a different conversation even for the older guys. So those man-woman roles of, I have to do this. Like I was just in a group the other day where a younger guy told me, he said, I don't like the idea that they keep calling it visitation. I don't have to visit my child. And so I got it. As soon as he said it, I went to DCFS, let's change this role. We're going to call it parent time now. And we're looking to change system-wide, change that word from child visitation to parent time, because takes away from a father. I'm not a father if I'm visiting him. It's my child. So yes, they are very interested in changing the roles, and especially when it comes to masculine and sexual, and it doesn't really have to do with gay and not gay. I want to be a father on my own terms. For some of them, a provider looks different than it did 20 years ago. Providing means I'm going to stay at home. And we have a lot of stay-at-home dads who talk a lot about how they have to deal with family members and friends about saying I'm a stay-at-home dad, and how if they didn't have the support of our group, they would feel less than and might take it out on their significant other or their families. But because they have the support and they have other men behind them saying, go ahead, bro, you can stay at home, it's working out for them. Questions? Yes, ma'am. Oh.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So I have a question around your evaluation for Head Start. It sounds like you've really changed the culture there. And I'm wondering, whether you've ever thought about, or if you guys, in particular for Head Start, have partnered with maybe, one or two of the fathers and made them champions of the program, and then maybe how that changed acceptance and engagement of the other fathers.
So yes, there's in Head Start, I think it's called the Advisory Council. And so the president of our advisory council is a male who's really active and has helped us recruit. But he's helped us recruit by saying, don't come in telling us that there are these programs that we have to come to in order to show that we're concerned parents. And so we have activities, and most Head Start programs, they have, I think it's called Hero Day now, once a year, where somebody comes in and dad gets to be a hero for one day out of the whole year. And so what he's saying, be present all year long. And so that's what we've done. We're present without making it a big thing all year long. And so fathers are starting to buy in that there is a space for me here. My staff goes with their t-shirts, says every day's Father's Day. And we really live through that we're not just going to come to you in June when it's Father's Day. We're here all year long. And so we've created homework spaces for the fathers to sit and learn the ABCs, 1, 2, 3s, a place for fathers just to sit down and play blocks before and after school. Fathers really starting to respond to that, as opposed to, you were saying, traditional roles that they had not been welcome to in the past. Thank you so much.
How many fathers do you think work with?
So we serve about 1,000 fathers a year. Yeah, both in English, Spanish, and Korean. It's pretty impressive.
Well, thank you, Alan
Thank
Michael,
you.
for a fantastic presentation. I hope we'll be able to get you to come back
Of
maybe
course,
once a year.
of course. I'd love to.
So just a quick reminder for our next seminar, will be Dr. Heather Bemis, who I think might be back there, who will be speaking about stress and coping in families of medically ill children. So again, thank you so much, Alan
Appreciate it.
Michael.
Thank you.